She was buried in Rakhigarhi, in the soil of Haryana, more than 4,500 years ago. For most of that time, her bones said nothing. Then modern science reached into that grave and pulled out a secret that would contradict what an entire region believes about its own blood. Her burial is catalogued now as individual I6113, a woman laid to rest in Haryana somewhere between 4,500 and 5,000 years ago. Getting her story out of the ground was almost impossible. Researchers screened more than 60 skeletons at the site, and only one, hers, yielded usable ancient DNA, after more than 100 failed sequencing attempts. What that single genome held onto was extraordinary. Zero-step pastoralist ancestry. None. Not a trace of the very ancestry that modern Punjab has built its entire identity around. Think about what that means. The population with the strongest reputation for warrior steppe blood anywhere in South Asia turns out, at the genetic level, to be a layered mosaic, not a bloodline running in an unbroken line back to some ancient warrior stock. And the twist cuts even deeper than that. The single most Aryan-coded Y chromosome marker carried by Punjabi men today, R1a Z93, is completely absent from the only Indus Valley genome science has ever managed to sequence. So if the oldest DNA recovered from this land carries none of it, where did it actually come from? That question is the entire reason this story exists. It's not a small correction to a family tree. It's a challenge to how an entire region understands where it came from, who its ancestors were, and what Punjabi has ever actually meant, biologically speaking. To find that answer, we have to go back further than the river itself. Back before cities, before agriculture, before anyone thought to call this land Punjab at all. किसी दिन अगर इतनी पुरानी बातों में दिलचस्पी हो, तो चैनल को सब्सक्राइब कर लेना, फ्री है, और अगली वीडियो सीधा इनबॉक्स में आ जाएगी. Punjab today is not one place. It spans both Indian Punjab and Pakistani Punjab, home to more than 150 million people combined, and it stands as one of the most densely studied genetic zones anywhere in South Asia. Modern Punjabis carry the highest ancestral North Indian proportion found anywhere in the subcontinent, somewhere between 62 and 72%. But that single number is deceptive on its own, because it isn't one ancestry. It's three, stacked on top of each other. Break the ANI figure apart and you find an Indus Valley-derived layer, a steppe pastoral layer, and an Iranian farmer layer, each arriving at a different point in time, each carrying a different story. The proportions matter here. Indus Valley-derived ancestry sits somewhere between 42 and 67% of the modern Punjabi genome. Steppe pastoral ancestry, the component most associated with the Aryan narrative, sits at only 28 to 35%. Even that celebrated steppe component is a minority stream, not the majority foundation people assume it to be. The forensic record backs this up in a different way. A 2019 panel study examined 87 Pakistani Punjabis across 165 genetic markers. And the result was blunt. Punjabis were statistically inseparable from other South Central Asian and Middle Eastern populations. There is no isolated, distinct Punjabi cluster sitting apart from its neighbors. Genetically, the boundary that culture draws around Punjab simply doesn't exist in the data. None of this is an accident of sampling. Punjab's geography explains it. It's flat, river-fed, and wedged directly between Iran, Central Asia, and the Gangetic Plain. A landscape built for movement, not isolation. That kind of geography doesn't produce a fortress. It produces a corridor. A corridor doesn't produce a bloodline. It produces layers. And Punjab has at least three. Go back far enough, past the farmers, past the cities, past every migration this story will eventually cover, and you land on the deepest layer of all. AASI, the ancient ancestral South Indian lineage, the indigenous hunter-gatherer population of the subcontinent itself. The Rakhigarhi genome is where this layer first becomes visible in hard data. That individual's DNA combined Iranian-related farmer ancestry with AASI ancestry, making it the oldest confirmed genetic layer found anywhere in the Indus region. AASI lineages themselves predate agriculture in South Asia by thousands of years. This is a population that was here long before anyone in this region ever planted a seed on purpose. And this layer never disappeared. Even today's heavily admixed Punjabi genetic profile still carries this deep AASI substrate, sitting underneath both the Indus Valley layer and the steppe layer that arrived later. It's the foundation everything else was built on top of. The maternal evidence makes the point even more sharply. Punjabi maternal haplogroup M, in subclades like M3 and M30, traces back 40,000 to 60,000 years. among the oldest lineages found anywhere in South Asia. And despite every later wave of migration into this region, that maternal lineage remained dominant. It never got replaced. That detail forces a specific conclusion. Punjab's female lineage is overwhelmingly ancient and local, largely undisturbed by the population movements that everyone associates with this region's history. It's the male lineage, the Y chromosome record, that carries the story of migration, of new populations arriving and leaving their mark. That split matters more than almost anything else in this entire investigation. Old mothers, new fathers. Hold on to that pattern, because it's the single most important clue in understanding everything that comes next in Punjab's genetic history. Long before any steppe pastoralists set foot near the Indus, another population had already arrived, Iranian-related farmers, entering the northwest subcontinent roughly 8 to 10,000 years ago, carried in by the spread of early agriculture. The Rakhigarhi woman's own genome carries this signature directly. Her ancestry traces back to ancient Iranians and to Southeast Asian-related hunter-gatherers, though that phrase describes lineage, not geography. Her ancestors didn't necessarily live in Iran. The genetic signal simply connects back to that broader ancestral pool. This Iranian-related component stands apart from and predates any steppe pastoralist migration by thousands of years. It was already old by the time steppe populations entered the picture. The 2019 Narasimhan study confirmed this same pattern well beyond Rakhigarhi itself. That research identified the identical Iranian-related and AASI mixture in 11 so-called Indus periphery outlier skeletons, discovered in Turkmenistan and Iran and dated between 3300 and 2000 BCE. This wasn't a one-off signature limited to a single burial in Haryana. It was a consistent genetic pattern spread across a wide geographic range, appearing wherever this early population left remains behind. What this blend represents is bigger than any one skeleton. This combination of Iranian-related farmer ancestry and AASI ancestry is now understood by archaeologists as the true genetic foundation of the Indus Valley Civilization itself, established well before any contact with steppe populations occurred. This was the population base, the biological starting point, on which everything that followed would eventually be layered. By the time this mixture had matured into the population that would go on to build cities, it had already been stable, unchanged, and undisturbed for millennia. It was a settled, ancient foundation. And then, into that stability, something else showed up. By the time this Iranian farmer and AASI population reached its peak, it wasn't just surviving, it was building. Rakhigarhi itself stands as proof, one of the largest sites of the Indus Valley Civilization, located in Haryana roughly 150 kilometers northwest of Delhi, spread across multiple mounds that archaeologists are still excavating today. The civilization this population built stretched across what is now Punjab, Sindh, Haryana, and Pakistan's Indus Basin, a civilization that rose at the same time as Egypt and Mesopotamia, on a comparable scale of ambition. To understand exactly who built it, the 2019 Narasimhan study analyzed ancient DNA from 523 individuals across Central and South Asia, the largest ancient DNA dataset ever assembled for this region. Statistical modeling using QPADM confirmed that the Rakhigarhi individual fits cleanly within the wider Indus periphery Klein population, at a confidence level of p equals 0.42. What that population built was remarkable by any standard. The Indus cities had advanced drainage systems, standardized weights used across enormous distances, and long-distance trade networks reaching all the way to Mesopotamia. Every bit of it, the engineering, the administration, the trade, was built by a population descended from Iranian farmers and AASI hunter-gatherers, with no steppe ancestry present in the mix at all. That's the detail worth sitting with. The civilization responsible for some of the ancient world's most advanced cities did so with zero genetic contribution from the very group that Punjab is most associated with today. The builders and the identity that later claimed this land are, genetically, two different stories entirely. Then, for reasons still being pieced together by researchers, the cities emptied out. The Indus Valley Civilization didn't fall. It faded. Its decline began around 1900 BCE. Not as some sudden catastrophe, but as a slow, grinding process of de-urbanization. Cities like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa lost population gradually, their drainage systems clogged with disuse, and the trade routes that once reached Mesopotamia dried up one by one. Modern climate science has replaced the old explanation for this decline entirely. For decades, the collapse was framed as an invasion. That story is gone. In its place, researchers now point to weakening monsoons, tectonic shifts beneath the Himalayas, and growing economic isolation as the real drivers of change. This wasn't conquest, it was environment. The tectonic piece of this puzzle is especially striking. Activity in the Himalayas likely diverted two major rivers, the Yamuna and the Sutlej, away from the Ghaggar Hakra river system altogether, cutting off the tributary flow that system depended on to stay alive. A river that had sustained cities for centuries simply lost its water source, redirected by the shifting earth beneath it. The evidence for this is specific and recent. A 2020 joint study conducted by IIT Kharagpur, the Archaeological Survey of India, and the Physical Research Laboratory tied the decline of the Harappan city of Dholavira directly to this river drying, compounding with the Meghalayan drought event that struck the same period. Two forces, hitting the same city at the same time. And the picture keeps widening. More recent research connects drought intervals across the entire Indus Basin to El Niño-like warming patterns in the Pacific, paired with cooler conditions across the North Atlantic, a combination now understood to reliably weaken the Indian summer monsoon. The rainfall these cities depended on wasn't disappearing by accident. It was being suppressed by forces operating on a scale far larger than any single river or city. The rivers moved east, so did the people. And that's when Punjab's second genetic layer arrives. Long before the Ghaggar Hakra Valley went dry, it was alive with water and alive with people because of it. Isotope evidence recovered from Birana, a site sitting in what is now the dried-out Ghaggar Hakra Valley, shows that pre-Harappan settlement there was made possible by an intensified monsoon, active roughly between 9,000 and 7,000 years ago. This was fertile ground, long before any city rose on it. But the river's true origin has become one of the most contested points in this entire field. A widely cited 2012 study challenged a long-standing assumption that the Ghaggar Hakra, the river system often identified with the Vedic Saraswati, was fed by Himalayan glacial melt. The study argued instead that it ran on monsoon rainfall alone. That distinction changes everything about how this river died. It didn't vanish suddenly, the way a glacier-fed river might if its source were cut off. Aridification instead reduced it gradually, down to short, seasonal flows that eventually stopped sustaining large populations. The timing lines up with forces already in motion elsewhere. This river system's eventual decline roughly coincides with the beginning of the Meghalayan climate stage, a formally defined period of global aridification affecting far more than just this one valley. The stakes of this river's death were enormous, because this was not a minor waterway. This system fed the highest density of known Harappan settlements anywhere in the region. Its slow death maps directly onto the depopulation researchers have traced across the wider area. As the water thinned, so did the population depending on it. One question still sits unresolved in the academic literature: whether this river genuinely is the Saraswati, described in later Vedic texts. That identification remains a live debate, not a settled fact, and no amount of isotope data has closed it yet. A dying river doesn't just end a civilization. It clears the ground for whoever arrives next. Into that emptied ground came a new population, and its arrival can now be dated with real precision. The Yamnaya-related steppe pastoralist migration into South Asia occurred roughly between 2000 and 1500 BCE, arriving only after the Indus Valley Civilization's decline was already well underway. The cities were fading before the steppe ever reached them. The genetic marker at the center of this migration has its own clear timeline. R1a Z93 appears in ancient steppe DNA samples between 3000 and 2000 BCE, and it shows up there before it appears anywhere in South Asian ancient DNA. The sequence matters. This lineage existed on the steppe first, for centuries, before it ever reached the subcontinent. The Rakhigarhi genome settles the question of when it arrived. As the only confirmed Indus Valley Civilization sample recovered so far, it shows no R1a at all. The complete absence of that lineage in the one confirmed IVC individual means this genetic marker only entered the region after the IVC period had already ended. Archaeogenetics has also revised how this migration is understood. It's no longer described as a single invading army sweeping through in one dramatic event. The current picture is a slow generational infiltration through Central Asia, unfolding over centuries. The old language of an Aryan invasion simply doesn't match what the genetic record shows. The deeper lineage traces back even further. R1a's steppe origins reach back to the Pontic-Caspian steppe around 5000 BCE. The Z93 subclade specifically emerged around 3000 BCE, alongside the corded ware culture. Its South Asian-specific branch, RL657, arose around 2500 BCE, and it became established in South Asia by roughly 1500 BCE. A journey spanning thousands of years and thousands of kilometers before it ever touched Punjab's soil. This is the layer Punjab is famous for. It's also the layer that arrived last. The room was full of cameras when the Rakhigarhi results were announced, and the words spoken there would outlast the data itself. Lead archaeologist Vasant Shinde, a known associate of the RSS-affiliated science organization Vijnana Bharati, stood at that press conference and made two claims: that the DNA showed no Aryan invasion had ever occurred, and that the Indus Valley people had spoken Sanskrit. Critics moved quickly, and their objection was precise. DNA cannot reveal what language a person spoke. No genome carries a record of speech. Shinde, an archaeologist by training, was stepping well outside the boundaries of what his own evidence could support, and outside his area of expertise entirely. The deeper irony sits inside Shinde's own published paper. Its actual peer-reviewed conclusion said the opposite of what he'd announced to the press. The Indus Valley Civilization, according to his own data, had no steppe ancestry at all, a finding that aligned squarely with the mainstream Indo-Aryan migration model, not against it. The paper and the podium were telling two different stories. That gap is the whole controversy in miniature. The public framing of a genetic finding and the actual peer-reviewed conclusion of that same paper pulled in completely opposite directions, presented by the same person, on the same day, from the same research. The scientist who stood up and announced no Aryan migration had, in that very announcement, just published data now cited as some of the strongest evidence supporting exactly that migration. Not proof against migration, proof of exactly when it hadn't happened yet. A single paper can rewrite a field and then get rewritten itself within a year. In 2018, a paper by Debarros Damgard and colleagues made a specific argument that the Bronze Age Central Asian culture known as BMAC served as a source population for modern South Asians. That conclusion rested on just two ancient BMAC samples, a thin foundation for a claim that large. Narasimhan and colleagues overturned it in 2019, using 86 ancient DNA samples recovered from BMAC sites, a sample size more than 40 times larger than the study it was correcting. The result reversed the entire direction of the story. The migration ran the opposite way, out of South Asia and into BMAC, not the reverse that had just been proposed a year earlier. The stakes of that reversal go straight to the center of this investigation. It flips a key piece of the "where did Indus people come from" narrative. The Indus-related population functioned as a genetic source for Central Asia, not as a genetic recipient receiving people from it. The direction of ancestral flow, once thought to run one way, runs the other. What makes this moment stand out is the process itself. This is real scientific self-correction, happening within a single calendar year, driven by a dramatically larger and more rigorous sample. No political motive drove the reversal. Better data did. So the traffic on this road ran both ways. Which brings us back to the people actually living in Punjab today. Among Jat Sikhs, the numbers reach a level rarely seen anywhere else in South Asia. R1a Z93 shows up at 55 to 65% frequency in this community, among the highest recorded anywhere on the subcontinent, comparable even to Brahmin groups drawn from the same region. This isn't a single study's result either. The figure is compiled across 3 separate peer-reviewed studies, spanning more than a decade of research. Sengupta and colleagues in 2006, Underhill and colleagues in 2015, and Narasimhan and colleagues in 2019. 3 independent teams, 3 separate datasets, converging on the same picture. But the picture shifts depending on exactly where you look. Sikh Jats of Punjab specifically show steppe ancestry around 25 to 30%, with R1a frequencies of 35 to 42%, slightly lower than their Hindu Jat relatives across the border in Haryana. The same broad community, split by geography, carries slightly different proportions of the same ancestral layer. Haryana Jats carry the highest steppe ancestry of any Jat group measured, at 28 to 32%, with R1a Z93 frequencies climbing to 40 to 48%. That concentration isn't random. It's tied directly to Haryana's position at the heart of the traditional Kurukshetra and Vedic heartland, the geographic center most closely associated with this ancestral stream. Punjabi Jats, meanwhile, carry higher frequencies of a different marker entirely, haplogroup LM20, a lineage tied to deeper, Indus Valley-descended ancestry rather than the steppe. Where Haryana leans toward the newer layer, Punjab holds on to more of the older one, Same steppe layer, different depth. And that depth changes again once religion enters the picture. The Jat community today doesn't belong to one faith. It splits three ways. Hindu Jats concentrated in Haryana, Uttar Pradesh, and Rajasthan. Sikh Jats centered in Punjab, and Muslim Jats spread across western Uttar Pradesh, Rajasthan, and Pakistan. These divisions aren't ancient. They trace to specific historical moments. Mughal-era conversions producing the Muslim Jat population, and the rise of Sikhism in the 17th and 18th centuries producing the Sikh Jat population. Given how sharply these communities diverge in belief, ritual, and identity today, the genetic data delivers a surprising result. Despite these centuries-old religious splits, studies show all three subgroups are nearly genetically identical. R1a frequencies overlap almost completely across all three. Steppe ancestry proportions track closely together. ANI and ASI ratios align almost perfectly, group to group. That finding deserves to sit for a moment because of what it implies about identity itself. Religion stands as one of the most visible, most consequential identity markers anywhere in South Asia. It shapes marriage, community, law, and daily life. And yet at the genetic level, it turns out to track almost nothing within this particular community. The line that religion draws between these three groups is a line drawn entirely on top of a shared genetic foundation. Centuries of religious conversion, spanning three entirely different faiths, left almost no genetic fingerprint at all. Whatever changed when a Jat family became Muslim or became Sikh, it wasn't their ancestry. It was everything built on top of it: belief, practice, community, law. Religion redrew the map of belief. It barely touched the map of blood. Move away from the agrarian Jat communities and into Punjab's mercantile class, and a different genetic story emerges. Genetic studies consistently show Khatris and Auroras as nearly identical in their paternal Y-DNA profile, forming one of the most clearly defined genetic clusters found anywhere in Punjab. Their paternal signature, though, sets them apart from the Jat population. Khatris carry slightly lower R1a frequencies than Jat Sikhs, but they carry higher frequencies of the Aryan-linked J2 lineage, pointing toward a different historical mix entirely, one more likely tied to trade route contact than to pastoralist migration off the steppe. Different roads brought different ancestors. The maternal side tells yet another layer of this story. Khatri mitochondrial DNA is dominated by the indigenous South Asian macrohaplogroup M, accounting for 40 to 60% of samples, alongside R and U lineages making up another 20 to 30%. West Eurasian maternal markers, haplogroups like HV, H, and W, appear in only 3 to 7% of the population. The maternal line here is overwhelmingly local, almost untouched by outside ancestry. That combination, a distinct paternal signature paired with a maternal signature nearly identical to the Jat population, reinforces a pattern now visible across Punjab as a whole. The men who arrived brought new lineages. The women already there stayed constant. Historically, this divide tracks social roles as much as genetics. Khatris and Auroras occupied trading and urban administrative positions rather than agrarian ones, and that social distinction shows up in the genetic record as a distinction in its own right. Different trade, different lineage story, but the same female foundation underneath everyone in this region. Punjab's genetic story is usually told through two communities, Jats and Khatris. That framing leaves almost everyone else out. Studies of Punjabi Jats, Khatris, Brahmins, and scheduled castes together show that although these groups share a regional gene pool, they remain a genuinely heterogeneous mix, not one uniform Punjabi genome that can stand in for the whole population. Genetic research on Dalit communities in Punjab tells a story that rarely makes it into the popular narrative at all. Groups including Chamar and Ravadasi communities, alongside Balmiki and Mazhabi Sikh groups, show a paternal profile that mixes ancient indigenous lineages with early migratory markers. That combination reflects both deep regional roots stretching back long before any steppe contact, and centuries of social stratification layered on top of them. This is a part of Punjab's genetic story that almost never surfaces in the popular warrior race narratives built almost entirely around Jat and Khatri data. Entire communities with their own distinct ancestral threads simply don't appear in the version of this history most people have heard. The pattern documented in the 2019 Narasimhan paper, where steppe ancestry proportion tracks traditional caste hierarchy across South Asia broadly, holds true inside Punjab specifically, not only at the national level. The same correlation between ancestry and social position that researchers found across the subcontinent repeats itself within this one region, community by community. The louder the myth, the fewer names it usually includes. Sometimes, the most revealing genetic discoveries come from the quietest corners of the research literature. A 2018 mitochondrial DNA study sampled 100 Punjabi individuals across the Aryan and Ghaggar caste specifically, built with a forensic purpose in mind, establishing an mtDNA database for the region. The results confirmed the maternal pattern seen elsewhere in Punjab. Haplogroup M appeared in 38% of the samples, and haplogroup U appeared in 24%, making these two the predominant maternal lineages found across the study population. Together, they accounted for the clear majority of the maternal ancestry recorded. But this study produced something beyond confirmation. The researchers identified an entirely new mitochondrial subhaplogroup, designated M52B1, found specifically within the Ghaggar caste sample. It had never previously been documented anywhere in the scientific literature. A brand new branch on the human maternal family tree, discovered inside a single regional forensic study. The broader statistical picture backed up everything found elsewhere in this investigation. The study's PCA analysis placed the overall Punjabi maternal gene pool clustering firmly with other South Asian populations, not with West Eurasian ones. The maternal line, once again, points home. This is the kind of granular, non-headline-making research that almost never reaches popular ancestry content. A brand new maternal lineage, discovered and formally published, sitting quietly inside a forensic genetics journal rather than a viral video. Every caste in Punjab is still handing researchers new data. The picture isn't finished. Away from the headline-grabbing studies, a quieter kind of research fills in the fine-grained detail of this region. A forensic genetics study analyzed 12 X-chromosomal STR markers across 125 families, split between 75 Kashmiri families and 50 Punjabi families, drawn from Azad Jammu and Kashmir and from Punjab, Pakistan. The scale of variation this study uncovered was substantial. Across both groups combined, researchers identified 222 total alleles across the 12 loci examined. Of those, 171 were specific to the Punjabi sample, and 161 were specific to the Kashmiri sample. A striking amount of distinct genetic variation packed into two neighboring populations. Within that dataset, individual markers told their own stories. The locus DXS10148 proved the most genetically diverse of all 12, with 28 distinct alleles recorded. At the opposite end, DXS7132 was the least diverse, with only 9 alleles found across the entire sample. Studies like this weren't designed to answer questions about ancient migration or civilizational identity. They exist purely for forensic and paternity case utility, built for courtrooms and crime labs rather than documentaries. But incidentally, in doing that narrow technical work, they map exactly how genetically distinct or genetically connected neighboring Punjabi and Kashmiri populations actually are, at a resolution most historical studies never reach. What stands out is how rare this kind of data still is. Genetic studies at this level of detail remain uncommon, specifically for Pakistani Punjabi and Kashmiri populations, which means much of this region's fine-scale genetic structure remains undocumented, sitting outside the reach of the larger studies that get all the attention. Even the forensic scientists admit this region's genetic map still has blank spots. Pull every thread of this investigation together, and 3 confirmed layers emerge, arriving in strict sequence. First AASI, tens of thousands of years old, the indigenous foundation beneath everything else. Second, Iranian farmer admixture, arriving 8 to 10,000 years ago and stabilizing into the population that built the Indus cities. Third, steppe pastoralist ancestry carrying R1a Z93, arriving between 2000 and 1500 BCE, only after the Indus Valley Civilization had already begun its decline. The proportions across Punjab today reveal exactly how that third layer settled in. Why DNA across the region runs 35 to 50% R1a, yet maternal lineages remain 70 to 85% indigenous South Asian. That gap between the paternal and maternal record is not a footnote. It is clear evidence that the steppe migration was male-mediated, incoming men marrying into existing local populations across generations, rather than replacing them outright. This male-biased pattern doesn't appear in just one community and then vanish. It repeats identically across every community sampled in this investigation. Jat, Khatri, Aurora, Dalit. The specific ratios shift from group to group, but the underlying mechanism holds steady across all of them, without exception. None of this data supports a single pure bloodline story for any Punjabi community. What the evidence consistently shows is layered admixture, built up over thousands of years, not descent from one unbroken ancestral population passed down intact. The trait most associated with Punjabi identity, the steppe and R1a signature, is present in every layer of Punjabi society, high caste and low caste alike, differing only in concentration. That alone undermines any claim that this signature marks out a separate, pure lineage belonging to any one group. So if there's no single bloodline, where does the story people tell about themselves come from? The Aryan invasion framing didn't originate in a laboratory. It entered public consciousness through 19th century colonial-era linguistics and archaeology, constructed by scholars working centuries before any ancient DNA existed to test whether it was actually true. Modern archaeogenetics has since replaced that framing entirely. In its place sits a slower, multi-phase model of system collapse and gradual migration, climate-driven depopulation of the Indus cities, followed by generational steppe infiltration over centuries, not a single invading army sweeping through in one dramatic campaign. The evidence built across this entire investigation supports that slower model at every stage. The 2019 Rakhigarhi press conference episode showed exactly how fragile the boundary can be between data and narrative. A single ancient genome filtered through political and identity framing got pulled in directions the underlying data never actually supported, announced with confidence to a room full of cameras. That gap hasn't closed in the years since. Popular ancestry testing content today routinely collapses 3 separate ancestral layers, each with its own timeline and its own evidence, into one simplified Aryan versus indigenous binary. The actual peer-reviewed picture, the one this investigation has walked through piece by piece, is a slow, multi-thousand-year layering process with no clean binary anywhere inside it. This gap between nuanced published research and the simplified public narrative is where most of the internet's confident claims about Punjabi DNA actually originate. Not from new data, from old data, flattened. The data was never hiding, it just never fit neatly into the story people wanted to tell. For all the ground this investigation has covered, the honest starting point is how little confirmed evidence any of it rests on. Only one confirmed ancient genome exists directly from the Indus Valley Civilization heartland, the Rakhigarhi woman. Most conclusions about the IVC period rest on that single data point, supplemented by the 11 Indus periphery outliers found outside the IVC itself. Recovering even that one genome pushed the limits of what was possible. Researchers needed more than 100 sequencing attempts just to recover a single usable genome. A reminder of how fragile ancient DNA preservation is across South Asia's hot, humid climate, compared to regions like the European steppe where conditions favor much better preservation. Several major questions remain genuinely open: the exact size, speed, and social structure of the steppe migration into Punjab specifically, as distinct from South Asia broadly, remains an active and unsettled research question, without a firm answer yet. The identity of the Ghaggar Hakra as the literal Saraswati described in later Vedic texts remains scientifically unresolved. It has not been confirmed, despite how often it gets treated as settled in popular discussion. And the clearest path forward is also the most obvious one. More ancient genomes recovered from Punjab and Pakistan specifically, rather than Haryana and Central Asia, would meaningfully sharpen or potentially overturn parts of the picture this investigation has just laid out. Every answer this video just gave you is still provisional. That's not a weakness in the science. That's what real science looks like mid-sentence. Return, for a moment, to the Rakhigarhi woman. Her single genome, recovered only after more than 100 failed attempts, quietly rewrote the timeline for an entire region's popular identity story, from a burial in Haryana more than 4,500 years old. The real Punjabi genetic story, pieced together across this investigation, runs like this. AASI depth reaching back tens of thousands of years, forming the oldest foundation. Iranian farmer ancestry arriving next, stable for millennia before it built cities. Steppe ancestry arriving last, only after the Indus cities had already begun emptying out. And running underneath all 3 layers, a consistent male-biased migration signature, repeating across every community examined, from Jat to Khatri to Dalit alike. No single bloodline explains this. No single invasion explains this. No single myth is big enough to hold what the DNA actually shows, once you look at all of it together, rather than the fragments that fit a preferred story. If the ground under Punjab holds this many layers, how many other pure histories are just waiting for someone to actually dig?